So, John, we're finally here. You know, you've got this big angle set for Mother's Day. We're getting this ready for Judgment Day. And this is probably, at this point, the biggest match of your entire career. Is that fair to say?
No doubt about it. No doubt about it. And this is my whole career. You know, I was, you know, I've told you before, I'd be happy to have been an APA member my whole career. I was glad I got this run. But this was it in a nutshell. I knew it was a one-off. Pat Patterson told me before the match, he says, "Hey, John, I hope you do great out there." He goes, "For your sake." And he kind of let that slip at the end. Like, basically, if you don't do well, we're never going to see you again. You would not be talking to me now. I would not be anywhere if that match had not worked. And when I say I owe everything to Eddie, I owe everything to Eddie, his family, and Bruce Prichard, because those are the guys that, you know, and Vince, and those are the guys that made this work. I worked with legendary talent that was able to get me over because of this. That was a spot we were in that was almost untenable, trying to fill in for Brock Lesnar, which I'm not saying I did. I'm just saying that's what spot I was in. Big Show and Kurt Angle being out. I knew the odds were stacked against me, and I knew that being a one-off was the high probability that was going to happen.
Well, it wound up being a lot more than that, and a lot of it is probably because of the match. And what I remember best about this, I remember where I watched this. I remember the address I was at, the people I was watching it with. It was a spectacle that we had never seen before in WWE. And I want to know, earlier in the day, is that what you guys aimed to do? Did you know it was going to be a bloodbath before you even got in there?
Yes. Yeah, 100%. We didn't know it was going to be that bad. Obviously, no one knew it was going to be that bad. But we knew it was going to be. And a couple things led up to that. First of all, Pat Patterson came in, who's one of the greatest agents in the history of the world, and he gave us this whole finish. And I'm watching Eddie, and Eddie was a guy who could not talk over a finish in the back, not because he wasn't intelligent. He was very smart, but because it was all feel to Eddie. You know, Eddie's one of those guys, you know, that you talk about two different things. You know, talk about story and you talk about match. Eddie's one of those few guys that could deliver both. You know, most guys can't. Most guys can deliver one or the other. You know, Shawn Michaels, Kurt Angle, Undertaker. There's a bunch of guys like that, but not that many. Eddie could deliver both. So Pat's going over this finish, and it was a really good finish, but Eddie, I could watch Eddie, and Eddie didn't feel it. You know, he knew he had a lot of heat. He knew he wanted to feel what the crowd was buying. So when Pat walked out, I asked Eddie, I said, "Eddie, what do you not like?" He said, "None of it." And I said, "You don't like any of it?" He said, "No, no." So I went to Pat, and I said, "Pat, you know, it's one of those things where you always preface it with, 'I need to talk to you.' You know, it's serious." And I said, "Pat, I need to talk to you." And he goes, "What is it?" And I said, "Pat," I said, "Eddie's not feeling it." And Pat said, "Which part?" I said, "Any of it." And he goes, "What do you want to do?" I said, "Can we call the whole thing out there?" And Pat said, "The whole thing." And I'm talking about the finish too. And he said, "Guys, if you succeed or if you fail, it's on you, not on me." He said, "I'll still be here." He said, "If you fail, you won't be. And if you make it," he said, "I hope you do." He said, "You do what you think's best for you."
Wow.
So we didn't have even a finish, Conrad. We didn't have a finish. We had nothing, zero planned. So I knew that we had heat. I knew when we got out there, and Eddie came to me right before the match, not right before, it was a few hours before, and he had this freaking dagger. It looked like one of these swords back here. He had this dagger, and we used to call them business blades. We had business blade. Black Bart used to always say, "I got a business blade. I got a business blade." And people would make a dagger occasionally. You know, Gary Hart was the one that came up with that because he used to carry Sweet Lucy in the bottom of his cigarette case in case a fan got too rambunctious. Gary had Sweet Lucy. It was a business blade. And Eddie had this freaking dagger. I mean, dagger. And he goes, "Essay." He goes, "Last time I juiced, I got so much scar tissue up here." He goes, "It didn't work." He goes, "I'm going to get good color today." I said, "Holy shit, Eddie, that's a sword." And he gave one of them to little Hebner because, you know, the worst thing in the world is when you need a juice and you drop a blade, you know, or get it kicked out of your hand. Like, you know, that can happen. I had that happen in Europe one time. I went to juice and Franz Schumann by mistake had kicked my hand. The damn thing, blade goes out. So I had told him to hard way me, which, you know, it's last thing you want to do is just have some guy bust you open. But he had an extra blade in Hebner's pocket, which cut his leg all up, and Hebner was being careful with it. I mean, it was a dagger that Eddie had, and he called it a business blade, you know, which is the old term in the business. Yeah. And I knew he was going to get good color. I had no idea it was going to be that much, but we knew it was going to be a bloodbath.
I'm fascinated with the idea that you guys were calling it in the ring. I do want to follow up on something you said, though. I know what you mean when you say, "Hey, we didn't have a finish." Some of our listeners are going to be confused and think you mean We didn't know who was going to win or lose.
Oh,
You're not suggesting that, but just the
No.
finishing sequence that leads to who goes over or who loses or whatever. That's what you're talking about, right?
That's right. Yeah. No, not to intimate in any way that it was a shooter, and absolutely not. We knew it was going to be a DQ. We didn't know how we were going to do it, and we knew about what time we were going to do it. But we didn't know how we were going to do it. I had some ideas in my head. I have no doubt that Eddie had ideas in his head. People always ask you, when you have a veteran in there, especially the heel usually calls the match. But when you got somebody like Eddie, who's a veteran who's so fantastic, it's kind of a mutual thing you're calling. It's kind of hard to explain, but I would call a lot of stuff that I was doing, and Eddie would call a lot of things that he wanted to do. And if somebody said they wanted to do something, obviously they had something in mind, and that would supersede what you had, and you would go with it. It's kind of like two ad-lib comedians is the best way to explain it. Standing on stage and kind of going whichever direction they think that the audience tells them. So, yeah, we did have we knew what the finish was going to be. It was going to be a DQ, and we knew about what time it was going to be, but we didn't know how we were going to get there.
Are you having a conversation with Vince ahead of time, letting him know that you're calling it out there, or is it all just you and Pat and Eddie making that
Nope,
decision?
just me and Pat. From what I remember, didn't have one conversation with Vince about it. It was all Pat, and Pat felt comfortable with it. I'm sure Pat relayed the message, and Vince knew how big a deal it was to us, and that we obviously felt comfortable with it. Vince was a guy that if you said, I want to do this, I know I can do it, Vince would give you the opportunity.
Is this the bloodiest match you've wrestled in at that point?
No doubt about it. And I didn't realize how much blood there was until later when I look back at it. Yeah, absolutely. I didn't realize how much blood was actually coming out of Eddie. It was unbelievable watching the thing back. Eddie, at one point, he told me, he goes, "Good juice essay." I said, "My blade's still on my wrist, you bastard." I hadn't pulled my blade out yet, and Eddie had busted me open with, I think, the title belt or something. And he just laughed. He thought it was funny. He goes, I got you. He's covered in blood. He's laughing because he had busted me open.
It's written in the Observer, Guerrero bladed, and that's hardly the word. It was coming out of his forehead like a faucet. When you're in the match and you see it coming out, you said you didn't realize until afterwards how much was coming out. So you didn't reconcile that he might actually be in a dangerous place here.
No, I didn't think he was. And I was talking to him the whole time. Now, I don't think he remembered part of the finish, but could have been the chair shot as well. We played rough back then. Yeah. And, people say, oh, unprotected chair shots. That's how we did all of them. It was no different. I did the same return for him just a month later in the pay-per-view. Eddie was talking to me out there. So I didn't think he was in any danger of not making the match, of being incoherent. If I had said something he didn't understand it, or if he had said something to me that made sense, that didn't make sense, I would have raised the red flag to Hebner about it. But there, at no point did I feel like Eddie was in trouble. And I know with all the blood stuff, that sounds crazy. I was talking to him out there the whole time. I'd been in a lot of matches with him. I never felt like Eddie was in danger.
The catalyst, of course, for the blood is the big chair shot. It's written that it is a sick chair shot to the head. Of course, we didn't know back then what we know now, and this would never happen today. But where does this rank in your all-time chair shots? I mean, we've seen some pretty brutal ones for you. Where is this one?
This is about one of the hardest ones I've given, but I've given a lot the same. I hit Bubba Dudley with one like this, and Bubba hit me one like this. Undertaker hit me with a chair shot one time in Japan in Budokan Hall, and he started cussing me because I didn't put my hands up. That one that Maven took was nothing compared to what I took, and Maven took a shot, brother. So we just played rough back then, and that's what we did. We didn't put our hands up. We played rough. We didn't know how bad concussions were. So a different era. But as far as a chair shot, we knew that was the seminal point of the match. We knew that was the most important thing we would do in that match, was that chair shot. Both of us knew that. And Eddie told me, if I'd done anything different, Eddie would have been furious with me. So Eddie knew it was coming. I knew I was going to whack him with it. And all I want to do is make sure and hit him flat with the chair, the surface, without the bottom rim or anything where I bust him open. Yeah. And I hit him about as square as you can hit him with that chair. There's no way to take that. I mean, that's a concussion waiting to happen, But back then, that's what we did.
Of course, this all happens after the ref has been bumped. When a cover is about to be made, here comes referee Charles Robinson to make the save. At this point, though, I mean, after Eddie's really bleeding, it's written by Dave Meltzer. By this point, the ring was like a canvas after a red paint explosion. I mean, what a descriptive term, but you've seen some of the images here at somethingtowrestle.com. And if you haven't seen this match before, I highly recommend that you go watch it. This is an incredible performance by both JBL and, of course, Eddie Guerrero. When we get to the actual finish, though, you're going to go for the fall-away slam. Eddie reverses it into a DDT. He's going to miss a frog splash. You bring the belt in. Hebner's distracted. Eddie gets it. He uses the belt on you in front of Hebner, and that's the DQ. The only thing that's weird about this match is, as great of a spectacle as it is that there's not a clean finish. Do you wish in hindsight there would have been?
I don't think so. I don't know. I think it'd be great to have a clean finish, and I certainly wouldn't have minded putting Eddie over. I would have been happy to. We knew we were trying to get to something further, and the only way to do that, I think, was to not have a clean finish. You know, if Eddie beat me in this one off, then the angle's over. You know, I've taken the place of all these guys I mentioned, and they're trying to build me to be this credible guy. And if I get beat, I think the angle's over, you know, especially when he
I would argue you should have won, John. I mean, I would argue that you should have won this. Like, if we're trying to make a new guy, and we see how bloody Eddie is, now if it looks like you've cheated to win this, you know, you gave his mom a heart attack, you bloodied him, and now you stole his belt. When he starts pouring, well, I just assumed, oh my God, JBL's going to win this thing, but they didn't do it here. Do you think they should have? I think
I think it could have been a good idea. I think yes. I think it could have been a good idea to put the belt on me then. I don't think there's any doubt about that, because they put me on the belt on me the next pay-per-view. So yes, I think it would have made more sense to do it then. I think this was the insurance policy in case I sucked.
Okay.
I mean, I think this was Vince saying, you know, we don't know for sure if John's going to be our guy.
Yeah.
And so you put the title on me, you're stuck with me. And all of a sudden now you've done something. Say the match was bad and they put the title on me. And all of a sudden you got this champion you really don't want. And so I think knowing all the politics backstage of me being totally new to that main event level, I think it was the right decision. Now, if they'd have known that JBL had gone on for the next year and been champion, yeah, I think that's the time he sort of switched the title.
It's interesting to think back about what happens in the post-match, because Eddie gets another chair shot. He hits you with the frog splash. He's destroying you with the belt. It is a main event spectacle. It's written here in the Observer. This was really quite an awesome spectacle, reminiscent of an old school Mexico main event, with Perro Aguayo coming back after bleeding all over the place, and the place was buzzing. He gave it 3 3/4 stars, and the cover story in the Observer is that Judgment Day as a pay-per-view needed a home run going into the main event, and you guys responded with one of the bloodiest matches in company history. But here's the report that I want your take on. When the night was over, the ring was filled with puddles of Guerrero blood, and Guerrero himself, after the adrenaline wore off, went into shock and had to be rushed to the hospital in an ambulance due to excessive blood loss. And after the television cameras went off, he collapsed in the ring from blood loss, had to be helped backstage. An ambulance was called. It took 16 stitches in the forehead from the ridiculously deep cut. At the hospital, they suggested him getting a blood transfusion, but he turned it down, and they pumped 2 bags of fluid into him before letting him go around 1 a.m. in the morning. He didn't wrestle the house show the next night in Palm Springs, but he did come out of it okay and is expected to wrestle this coming weekend. Do you remember all this? Was that real? Did he really go to the hospispittal?
I think he went to the hospital. Yeah, he was worried about the blood loss. He wasn't in shock. I was with him the whole time. He was upset, and maybe you can call it shock. You know, maybe that's the medical term, but Eddie was not. There was not a time where he passed out, or to my knowledge, I don't. You know, if he was working in the ring. It was when he came to the back, he was coherent. He was mad, and I think he probably had a concussion and all that blood loss. You know, there's a lot going on there, and they called when I went there to see him. They say, come see Eddie. He won't go to the hospital. And I said, okay. So I went in there, and Eddie was refusing to go. And I walked in, and Eddie just changed his tune completely. It was wild. Eddie and I never had a crossword. You know, he got into a fight with almost everybody he faced as a worker, except for me, which I'm thankful of. But when I walked in there, I said, hey, S.A. He goes, hey, S.A., great match. I said, Eddie, they need you to go to the hospital. He goes, okay. And that was it. He agreed to go. He did go to the hospital. I think Chavo went with him, I believe. But there wasn't I was sitting there talking to him. I don't think it was. Unless you can classify it somehow medically different as shock. You know, Bruce may have a different. Bruce was there as well. Maybe Bruce has a different opinion, but I didn't think it was shock.